All-Star Saturday coverage begins tonight at 8 p.m. Tomorrow, All-Star Game coverage starts at 7:30 p.m. So we'll talk about the All-Star weekend as well as the Sixers in the Eastern Conference right now with Julian Edlow, DraftKings. You can follow him on Twitter at Julian Edlow, and he joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Julian, how you doing this weekend?
I'm doing well. How about you, man?
Doing pretty good. So, we've talked a lot about the Sixers in the last, hour and change. Actually, you could argue we've talked a lot of Sixers for the last, years and change at this rate. So, I want to get from you your perspective, because a lot of people have a lot of perspectives on what the Sixers' problems are. Why are they better at home than the road? Can they do better in the last 27 games? Will Alec Burks and Glenn Robinson III have a big impact? Will they keep Al Horford on the bench? Can this team beat there's a million questions and what ifs and possibilities. So, kind of condense everything that is going on and give us an idea of where you think the Sixers stand in the Eastern Conference, and can they meet their potential this year?
Yeah, I think the biggest question surrounding the 76ers, if you want to make it about one thing, it's can they learn to win on the road? That by far has been the biggest issue for me. And I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but I know that they've lost, 2-3 games at home, and they've been absolutely awful on the road, losing not only to teams they're equal, but to far less talented teams in their road games. So obviously the way things are trending, it's going to be tough for Philly to get home court. Maybe they get it for the first round, but at some point in this postseason, whether it be Milwaukee, Boston, Toronto, Philly's going to have to win some tough road games if it wants to come out of the East. And that's been something that has just been a huge issue so far. Here in Boston, covering the Celtics a little bit, and the matchup isn't good for the Celtics. I don't love the Celtics necessarily against the 76ers, especially after Philly won those first 3 games. The size is a real issue. Boston's a smaller team. Philly is a huge team, especially with Simmons there at point guard. So I think that the Sixers have some matchups against teams that they like. Giannis is obviously an issue for Milwaukee, but then when you get past him, Simmons, Embiid, Horford, they have guys that are, the next most talented guys in that series. It's really just about, can the Sixers win games in Milwaukee, in Boston, in Toronto during the postseason and give themselves a shot to come out of the East, I think.
How much do you weigh the players' talent and their ability versus the impact of a coach? Like, for example, a lot of people in this area, there's a lot of people who don't want Brett Brown the coach anymore, right? But also you look at a place like Toronto, they were having success. They fired Dwayne Casey, and then Nick Nurse has, not just last year, but this year, done an excellent job. Whereas, how sure are we really that it's the players versus the coaching in Philadelphia?
Yeah, so I think coaching matters to a degree in the NBA. You can't have there's good coaches and there's bad coaches, really, and I don't think, sometimes you get a Greg Popovich, like an elite Phil Jackson type of coach that can help take all that talent and turn it into championships. But for the most part, I just think Dwayne Casey was a bad coach. He didn't really have an idea of what he was doing, and the talent on the floor won, but it couldn't prevail in a postseason series. I think Nick Nurse is a good coach. So going from a bad coach to a good coach, you're now successful in the regular season and translating that to postseason success. For Philly, I don't know if we've necessarily seen from Brown if he's exactly where he stands as a coach. So the talent is there. This team should be able to turn it into postseason success and hasn't yet. At the same time, I don't want to kill the Sixers too much for last year. They wound up losing in a Game 7 on a wild shot to the eventual champion. So, there was the year before that was absolutely a huge disappointment, losing as huge underdogs in 5 games to the Celtics. That was a series Philly was heavily favored in on DraftKings Sportsbook and other books. But, last year, I think the Toronto one, that can be a pass. So for me, this becomes the third major postseason for them. This is kind of got to be the make or break postseason to see if they have it or not. And it's going to be tough because Milwaukee's such a good team, but Milwaukee obviously lost to that Toronto team in far less convincing fashion than the 76ers did. So I think there's still hope for the 76ers. They have the talent. They have a coach that might be capable of leading them out of the East. They just have to learn to win on the road, and that's what's going to give them a shot to come out of the East.
If I had to take out of the conversation the Bucks and the Sixers, is there a third team if, let's say, Giannis gets injured and the Sixers just totally collapse? What is the third team in the Eastern Conference?
I mean, I think that you might be giving Philly a little bit too much credit there. I think that it's Milwaukee on its own tier by itself right now, and then I think that second tier is those three Atlantic Division teams, the 76ers, the Celtics, and the Raptors. The Raptors obviously ripped off that 15-game win streak that brought them right back into things, and they have the experience. They lost Kawhi, which is a huge piece, and I think gives them really just takes away their shot of actually winning a championship. But could the Raptors make it to the Eastern Conference Finals and extend that series? Yeah, I absolutely think they could. I think the Celtics or 76ers are in that same boat. But if you look at the Atlantic Division odds, you've got Toronto slightly favored to win it, Boston at slight plus money, and then Philly's way down there. Different books, they're like plus 400, 500 to win the division. So I don't think you can put Philly necessarily above Boston and Toronto, but I think those three teams are in the next tier behind Milwaukee. And then if you want to look at any type of long shots, I guess, Miami showed that it believes in itself at the deadline by acquiring Andre Iguodala, Jay Crowder, those guys. Miami's going to go for it. Indy getting Victor Oladipo healthy. I think those are going to be two tough playoff outs. So the East has some teams this year, but I think it's Milwaukee and then a pretty wide gap between the rest of those teams.
Julian Edlow joining us here on the Boardwalk Kind of Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Julian Edlow. DraftKings, DFS, Sportsbook, covering it all here on 97.3 ESPN. All-Star Saturday night is always an interesting night, not just because of what's going on the court, but because some of the odds create some interesting values for people. I know that when we discussed this last year, both of us kind of looked at where the values were, and that's kind of how we went. Is it a value-based thing again tonight? Because we know that, for example, no Damian Lillard, he's out of the field. We know that the dunk contest, it doesn't have as much, flair as it has had in the past. So, what kind of value could be out there for people who want to, put a little extra investment in the game tonight, in the action tonight, I should say?
Yeah, so, it's different than betting on anything else because it is All-Star Saturday night. You want to take this more casually, probably bet small for fun. But the good thing is, all these guys, even if you bet favorites, you're getting pretty good plus money on everyone, no matter what contest you're betting on. So if you pick the right guys, you're going to make out pretty well in terms of profiting. For value, just running through the contest, I think that point guards can be a little overvalued in the skills. We saw Jason Tatum win last year. I think Jason Tatum at plus 500, he's been talking a lot about repeating and retiring from the skills challenge. So it seems to be meaningful to him. I think a guy like Tatum at plus 500 or a guy like Chris Middleton at plus 450, these wings that are both, talented with the ball, can shoot the ball well. I think those are two guys to keep an eye on for betting the skills competition. For the three-point competition, again, you've got a guy like Joe Harris that won it last year whose shot is just built for this competition. Could be another guy that wins it and goes out on top of after winning two in a row. Harris at plus 450 is a guy that makes some sense. I think Davis Bertans is a guy at plus 550 that makes a lot of sense. He's a great shooter. I like that he's taller and he hits some deeper threes, and that matters this year with whatever they're calling it, the Mountain Dew zone, the Mountain Dew hotspot. There's going to be shots that are attempted from 6 feet behind the three-point line, which also obviously would have played to Damian Lillard. It does play to a guy like Trae Young, and I think it plays to a guy like Davis Bertans. If you want to take, I think the last time I looked, Zach LaVine was plus 1,200 to win the three-point shootout. He's not participating in the dunk contest in Chicago, which I thought was the wrong move. I thought he should be in it, but he was pretty serious about that, taking a lot out of him, and he doesn't want that, and he's going to go for the more finesse title in his building for the three-point shootout. So Levine is not a guy the type of shooter that would typically win this, but he can get hot, he can get streaky, he's going to have the crowd behind him. So for a small bet at the longest odds, I think, on the board, unless Devontae Graham has recently slipped past him, I think that makes some sense. And then finally, looking at the dunk contest, I think the dunk contest is off the board at DraftKings right now. It'll obviously be back up before that gets underway. But Aaron Gordon, I believe, was the slight favorite. Derek Jones right behind him. I think it was around plus 130, plus 140. And then the longer shots being Pat Connaughton and Dwight Howard. I don't necessarily see it for Dwight Howard. It's not a big man's competition. I think one of these little guys is going to win it. I think Pat Connaughton is going to surprise some people. I don't know if he's going to win, but I think he's the best value if we want to talk about values here. Just because Gordon and Jones are more, longer, more athletic. They just have the ability to do more. They're the type of guys that typically win it. But for me, I think it's going to be Jones or Gordon for me, and I'll probably have my money on one of those two guys.
I know you got guys for over at DraftKings, the DFS slate for Showdown, for the All-Star game itself. Obviously, an opportunity for people to have a lot of experimentation with the lineups because of all the different stars that are out there. What is something that stands out to you in terms of the options people have for the slate on Sunday night?
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. Even with a week-long break in NBA, we still get to feature this Showdown slate and play fantasy, and it's obviously a star-studded game. So the cheapest guy on the board, Chris Paul at $3,000, is a pretty enticing buy there. Like he's been out of the All-Star game for a few years. It sounds like he's pretty excited to be back. I think players are going to take this game more seriously with the new format, breaking it down into trying to win each quarter. Obviously, the Kobe tribute at the end, it would be meaningful, I think, to some guys, friends of Kobe, LeBron, Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, somebody to win that MVP award. So I think this is going to be a more serious game this year, which really, in an All-Star game, if you're making one lineup, you just want to sit back, pick your favorite players, put them in there. If you're going to make multiple lineups, you want to kind of mess around with your build, try and get exposure to all the different guys in the game. My only real fantasy advice for the game, I guess, would be generally the prototypical big guys don't do as well in this game. So a Rudy Gobert, a Domantas Sabonis, like the low post players, those are guys. The pace gives you more rebounds, but the rest of the game just doesn't play to them. Other than that, I think going anywhere on the board makes a whole lot of sense.
If I could just play a contrarian here, I saw on my podcast earlier this week that my pick for the MVP actually is Anthony Davis, and I believe on the board right now for MVPs plus 650. And the reason I said Anthony Davis is because it's in Chicago, and I think that LeBron in his full court press says he's still kind of recruiting Anthony Davis to stay with the Lakers. Maybe wants to feed him a little bit to maybe give him the opportunity to win that MVP award.
Yeah, I think that the hometown narrative for Davis is factored into that number because he's pretty high on the board. I think, what is he, the third favorite behind Giannis and LeBron?
Yep.
So I think that does play in there. Obviously, he's also there because he's one of the most talented players in the NBA. But those things do matter. I think you're right there, and I think that Davis is definitely a guy that is worth consideration here for MVP. Hometown narrative seems to be something that guys in the All-Star game do like, whether it's playing in their own building or playing in their hometown.
For the second half of the year, is there a team that you're keeping an eye on as we head down the stretch, whether it's in terms of fantasy, whether in terms of playoff seeding? Is there a team in the East or Western Conference you're looking at and saying, you know what, I really want to see what happens with this team or these players?
Yeah, so in the East, obviously, we spent plenty of time talking about the Atlantic Division, but just how those three teams that are relatively evenly matched, it seems, Boston, Philly, and Toronto, how that shakes out. It looks like Boston or Toronto has the edge in the division, but can Philly probably has the most talent. Can they come back and win that division? Will Philly be able to come back and get home court in the postseason? Like, I think there's a lot on the line in that division. Only other thought with the East would be where Indy winds up, because they're a very talented team. They're working Victor Oladipo back in. They went on that 6-game losing streak, which is really out of character for them. Their second half is going to be really important, I think, in terms of how they, it's the first time they've really been at full strength. I think that win over the Bucks to snap that 6-game losing streak was the second game that Indy played with their, projected starting lineup this season. So if they can get that lineup together, I think they can be a dangerous team in the East. Out West, I would say the most interesting aspect is Doncic is coming back. Houston leads that division. They just traded Capella, went with that small ball lineup. Houston lost to, Utah and Phoenix, but beat the Lakers and the Celtics with that new lineup. So in the long run, is that lineup going to be good or bad for them in terms of where they go in the West standings? And can a team like Dallas with Doncic back come and take that division from them, because it's only within a couple of games right now? And then I think Oklahoma City is one of the most interesting stories of the year. They're creeping towards home court. They wound up going into the All-Star break with a nice win as underdogs in New Orleans against the hot Pelicans team. Can they climb into that 4-5 matchup or even potentially get home court in the West?
Follow him on Twitter at Julian Edlow, DraftKings Sportsbook, DFS. You also got all the college basketball analysis all season long as well. So we'll be tracking you for that as well. I'm sure we'll touch base when the tournament comes around as well. Julian, appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me on. Anytime.